Oxford University had seen centuries of debate, but never a silence like this. It followed a single sentence from Professor Edmund Harrington. Africa has contributed nothing to human civilization. In the packed Sheldonian theatre, 500 scholars froze, but one man stood, Ibrahim Traore. What happened over the next 10 minutes would end a career, go viral, and rewrite more than just a lecture. It was a March afternoon, a routine event on global leadership. World figures and academics had gathered. Among them sat Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, invited for Oxford's African Leadership Series. Quiet and composed in a simple dark suit, he took notes, blending into the front row. At 3:30 p.m., Professor Harrington stepped up. A respected historian in his late 60s, silver-haired and scholarly, his credentials were impeccable. 12 books, 3 honorary doctorates, a Rhodes Scholar. As he began his lecture on the foundations of modern civilization, his tone turned from confident to condescending. He cited the usual milestones: mathematics from Greece, law from Rome, philosophy from Germany, industry from Britain. Then he delivered the line that would ignite the room. Africa, I challenge anyone here to name a single significant contribution from sub-Saharan Africa. The continent has been a recipient of civilization, not a contributor to it. Silence, heavy and electric. Traoré closed his notebook. Around him, African students stiffened, caught between disbelief and the weight of Oxford's tradition. Slowly, Traoré raised his hand. "Yes?" Harrington asked, irritated. Traoré stood, calm and deliberate. "Professor," he said, "I'd like to respond to your assertion." Harrington feigned ignorance of who he was. "Traoré, Ibrahim Traoré," he replied, "and I accept your challenge." Phones came out. Everyone sensed this moment mattered. "Please, enlighten us," Harrington sneered, "but spare us the romanticism. Stick to history." Traoré stepped to the podium, carrying a leather folder. He paused, looking first at the audience, then at Harrington. "Before I begin, Professor, have you ever studied the manuscripts of Timbuktu, the mathematical treatises of the Dune people, the metallurgy of the Haya in Tanzania?" Harrington dismissed them as mud buildings and folklore. "We're talking civilization, Mr. Traoré, not curiosities." Traoré remained poised. He opened his folder and held up a page. "This is from the Lubombo bone, found in Eswatini, 44,000 years old. It contains the earliest known mathematical markings, lunar cycles recorded thousands of years before Greek geometry." Harrington scoffed. "Counting notches isn't Pythagoras." Traoré raised another page. "Then consider the Ishango bone from Congo, 20,000 years old. Evidence of prime numbers and division. Pre-Greek by 19 millennia." He let that sink in. The audience leaned forward. "You want something more recent?" "The University of Sankore in Timbuktu, 12th century. It housed 700,000 manuscripts, taught 25,000 students, when Oxford was still just a collection of pubs." Now the silence was reverent. "You cite Roman law," Traoré continued. "What about the Ashanti Confederacy, with a constitution featuring checks and balances 3 centuries before the American one? Or the Buganda Parliament, which practiced democratic governance while Europe still bowed to monarchs?" Harrington tried to interrupt. Traoré calmly raised a hand. "Philosophy?" he pressed on. "Meet Zera Yacob, Ethiopian thinker of the 1600s. He explored reason, ethics, and human rights before the Enlightenment. His student, Walter Hayward, wrote treatises on justice and morality that rival anything in Europe. But they wrote in Ge'ez, not Latin. So perhaps that's why they don't count in your books?" A few murmurs, a few nods. You call these isolated examples? Let's talk Alexandria, founded by an African dynasty, holding the world's largest library while your ancestors lived in mud huts. African mathematicians knew the Earth's circumference while Europe debated if it was flat. He took a step forward. Medicine. Mali, 14th century, cataract surgeries. Uganda, 1879 to C-sections where mother and child survived, decades ahead of Europe. And variolation, an African practice that became the foundation of smallpox vaccines in the West. He lifted another page. Architecture. Great Zimbabwe's acoustics outperform modern concert halls. Nubian pyramids predate Egypt. The rock churches of Lalibela, carved from single slabs of stone with unmatched precision. The audience was transfixed. You haven't heard of these, Traoré said, not because they didn't happen, but because they disrupt your narrative of African primitiveness. Harrington, once smug, now stood stunned. Metallurgy. The Haya people were making carbon steel 2,000 years ago, a technology Europe wouldn't master until the Industrial Revolution. The Benin bronzes were so advanced, Europeans claimed they had to be Portuguese. He went on. Agriculture. Africans domesticated millet, yam, okra, and rice, built irrigation systems in the Sahel that fed cities of hundreds of thousands, while Europe endured the Dark Ages. The terraced farming of the Dune people has lasted over 1,000 years. Then he paused, looked Harrington in the eye. But most important, let's speak of Ubuntu. I am because we are. While Europe obsessed over conquest and individualism, Africa developed philosophies of human dignity, collective responsibility, and restorative justice, ideas the modern world is just now learning to value. He lowered his voice. The tragedy isn't that Africa contributed nothing. It's that scholars like you have spent centuries erasing what it did. He held up one last document. This is a letter from Cecil Rhodes, founder of the scholarship that may have funded your education. In it, he writes of the need to suppress African history to justify colonization. Your ignorance, Professor, isn't accidental. It's institutional. And you've spent 47 years defending it. Silence. Traoré looked around. I could go on, about the Dogon people predicting Sirius B, unknown to Western astronomy, about fractals in African art that predate Mandelbrot, about African music forming the roots of jazz, blues, and rock, but I think I've made my point. He concluded, the question isn't whether Africa contributed. It's why you don't know that it did, or worse, why you choose not to. A single clap rang out, then a second. Moments later, the room was on its feet. Thunderous applause, students, professors, even administrators. But the most unexpected voice came next. Professor Mary Whitfield, head of African Studies, stood. Mr. President, she began, using his title for the first time, as a representative of this university, I apologize. Your words exposed a deep failure in our curriculum. I move that we immediately revise it to reflect the truth you've outlined. The applause surged. Harrington, now isolated, found no support. His legacy unraveled in 10 minutes. Traoré spoke once more. I don't seek apologies, he said. I seek truth. Civilization is not owned by any one race or continent. It is the story of all humanity. But until we stop teaching an incomplete version of it, we keep ignorance and prejudice alive. As he returned to his seat, he passed Harrington. Professor, he said softly but clearly, I've left you copies of all my sources. I hope you'll take time to read them. By nightfall, the clip had gone viral. African president dismantles racist Oxford professor headlined across the internet. But the real headline, truth had finally spoken, and it echoed louder than any applause.